Can I? This is kind of you're not. I don't think you're expecting this because I wasn't expecting this, Carrie. But I thought about something and I want to share something with you before we go into the gratitude stuff because I was thinking about exactly what you were saying with the pushing back on Thanksgiving, and because I mean I saw it a little bit, but I didn't realize that it had metastasized so much. I mean, I guess it makes sense right now. Now it's everywhere, and there is this kind of hatred of Thanksgiving, and I know I usually think about like philosophically, like I think about beliefs that manifest in certain ways, but I was thinking this in terms of like rather than philosophy, I was thinking about emotional orientations to the world, and I it's just one model that I was. This is the model I'm using, and I don't know if it's correct, but I want to run it past you a little bit. So, um, I'm in terms of your emotional orientation to the world. I think there's maybe people can be categorized kind of very broadly as having there's two different kind of orientations emotionally. One is what I would call like an approval orientation or like a pro-life, I don't mean abortion wise, just like a pro-life or pro-reality kind of orientation, which is this feeling of kind of fundamental approval and maybe even like a fundamental approval of humanity or humans, and maybe specifically you if you're your own psychology, right? Um, this fundamental approval of the human's existence in reality. Like you see human flourishing as the standard by which you judge actions and stuff, and you see human suffering as, you know, maybe sometimes unavoidable, but it's not an ought. Like humans oughtn't suffer. It's not something that needs to happen. Like human qua human doesn't mean you must suffer. And you have this feeling that humans kind of ought to exist. They kind of do belong in reality where they are, and that they ought to flourish. And happiness, and I don't just mean like ephemeral hedonistic happiness, but like an internally motivated happiness, like a self-esteem, self-efficacy, that kind of the thing that comes with achievement and like raising a family that you're proud of or achieving something that you're proud of or whatever. That feeling, that self-esteem and self-worth, that your life is good and right and natural and deserved. Like that's kind of the emotional outlook they have on the world. And then there's the category of people who I would say like are the rejection orientation. And, you know, instead of life, it would be more death, or instead of reality, it would be more anti-reality. And there's kind of this emotional, fundamental disapproval of human existence in reality, and probably rooted in self-hatred, maybe their own existence, where human flourishing is viewed as this aberration. It kind of doesn't belong, and human suffering is the thing that kind of ought to happen. And humans qua humans don't belong in the universe. And so they're kind of destined for torture, and like that's a proper place for humans is to be suffering. And I'm thinking like, so these people, like it would be humans kind of ought not exist. They're like this blemish or this wart on the universe.
Yeah.
And so all that internally motivated happiness, that sense of self-esteem and sense of self-worth and the stuff that comes with, you know, doing something you can be proud of, it's wrong. It's out of place. It's unnatural. Your life is kind of unnatural. And when you feel that way, the sense, like if you see any happiness in the world, if any happiness comes into existence, it can really only do so through the introduction of more suffering. It's like a negative sum game for you. So if some person has happiness, that necessarily means that there must be more suffering somewhere else in the world
They're
because
taking it from someone.
yeah, the universe like negative balances out always somehow because that's kind of their outlook. And I think there's a lot of different like ideological, like that's more of the elephant, how the elephant feels, and so the rider can come up with lots of ideologies and rationalizations on both of those paths. So I'm not really talking about any particular ideology, but like if that's if that's what you're doing, then I thought about like, well, how does that relate to history and Thanksgiving and celebrations, and why because I read about the Cultural Revolution recently. I read about the Russian Revolution, both of which very adamant on tearing down history, and I'm trying to think of like like what's going on here, and what I came up with was, you know, you got to recognize that history is a mix of the good and the bad. Like any individual, it doesn't matter what event, you pick an individual that did something positive that you want to celebrate. It doesn't, it could literally be Jesus, right? Although maybe in Jesus won't fit the first thing here, but that individual inevitably probably did some negative things, so Jesus would be excluded from that if you're a Christian. But almost like any actual individual, they did some bad
Martin
things.
Luther King, pick MLK Jr.
Sure, he did some good things, but of course he did some bad things, right? He cheated on his wife or whatever, like some bad things, right? And Thanksgiving, by the way, since we were talking about Thanksgiving, like that absolutely falls into this. The Thanksgiving itself, regardless of what Europeans did to any Native Americans, Thanksgiving itself was a positive interaction. It was voluntary community helping each other. Like it was a good experience in and of itself, right? So you have to recognize that there's always a mix, and I think the people with the kind of rejection outlook want to play the Kevin Bacon game to look for something bad. So they're like, well, that interaction might have been good, but those individuals are connected to this other bad thing. Either they did them themselves, or they are a part of a group that did them, or they're part of a race that did other bad things somewhere else. Therefore, no good thing is untainted. It's always, because with the Kevin Bacon game, you can always get to Hitler, basically. You can always get to something horrible from something good, because you just oh, well, he was friends with this person, and that person was a member of this group, and this group did this other thing 500 years before that, or whatever it is, right? So I think if you're, so now I thought about Thanksgiving in particular, and like if you're this kind of positive approval model or emotional outlook, you select the events from history that are positive, that remind you of, like, here's a moment in history where we moved towards like human flourishing, or like we invented the light bulb or whatever, we founded America, or here's an event that reaffirms the positive values, or like that we can achieve positive values like cooperation or whatever, and you focus on celebrating that because that positive event from history like reinforces that approval model. It reminds you that values are achievable. And Thanksgiving is a great example, right? Because there's cooperation between disparate cultures. There's like abundance, overcoming of hardship, generosity, belonging, gratitude. Like all that stuff is mixed into Thanksgiving, and celebrating it reminds you, like it affects your actual psyche. Celebrating Thanksgiving affects your psyche. And you feel those things by proxy, kind of, right? And you're like, oh, like life is worth living, and like we can be grateful, and we can have abundance, and we can cooperate, and things can go well, and like it's this existential validation of life. But if you're in the rejection model and someone proposes, like if you're in the rejection feeling camp and someone proposes like, hey, let's celebrate this time when things went well, even if it was just for a moment in history. Between these few people, things went well just for a moment. Let's celebrate that. That reminder is like blasphemy to them, right? It's like they can't have that reminder, because any reminder of an achievement has to be corrupted. They've got to use the Kevin Bacon game. Yeah. They've got to show that it's related to something bad, and instead of building you up, it has to tear you down, right? I think this is why. I think this is why they go after, like, at a high level before, I've just kind of said, oh, they seem to not like happiness, which I guess is a short way to say everything I just said. But I wanted to think it through a little bit more. Like, why don't they like happiness? What's going on? And I think that's what it is. I think celebrating something like that, because you'll see it with Christmas, you'll see it with birthdays, you'll see it with gender reveal parties, everything. Yeah. Anything that anyone gets value out, where that it celebrates a positive value, is always connected through the Kevin Bacon game to some bad thing.
Yeah.
And that needs to be the focus. And I think it's that they can't have your psyche in this they can't have you feeling like you belong in the universe and that achievement and values are possible. They don't want that happiness of you. They don't want you to feel that way. Because what they want to sell you is momentary pleasure and ephemeral pleasure and like drugs and Netflix and sex, and they want to sell you all the other crap. They want you numbed to the world so that they can sell you these little dopamine hits, right? And get you compliant. and you're not likely to care about those if you actually have self-esteem and feel like you have self-worth and like achievement is possible and you're feeling good about your life. They need to tear all that down so that then they can be like, how about this new Netflix series, right?
Yeah.
How about Soma, the new drug we like, right?
Yeah.
So
It's also, I think for the people who have already accepted that framework, what you're calling sort of the negative framework, they've given into they've given into what my preacher would call the forgetfulness, which leads to ingratitude, which leads to entitlement, right, which leads to resentment. So they're living in resentment.
Yes.
And they resent your happiness. They resent your thankfulness. They resent anything positive in you because it's like a mirror that shows them what's not in them. And they can't stand it because
yes,
your positive things are a reflection. They're a reverse negative. They're a negative of what they are missing, and it highlights that in them. And and
it's not even intellectual, right? It's visceral. They feel it.
It's visceral. They feel it. They feel it's almost like when I gave an example in a previous episode about when people say, you make me feel this way. Like, okay, for example, when I quit drinking, almost everyone universally has been positive, with a few exceptions.
Except for the drunks.
Those people who seem to have a problem with me not drinking, I think it's because it makes them feel something about their own drinking that I'm not trying to make them feel. I don't care. I don't have a problem with people drinking around me or anything or drinking. But something in them feels that way just by having a person near them who's not doing what they do. It bothers them. And it's been very few exceptions, but I found that very interesting. And it's also almost like the other example I gave was, I heard the story secondhand, but that at my preacher's previous church, some of the people there took issue with him using big words. They said this one guy said it made him feel dumb.
I remember this.
And it's like, no, he's not making you feel dumb. You feel dumb. That's something in you that you haven't wrestled with. It's living in that you can't have anyone be better than you or have talents you don't have or have gifts you don't have, or him using big words makes you feel that way. That's you. That's all on you. It's not on him.
Yep.
And I think that's the same thing.